For most of human history, we have told the story of who rose and who fell, as a story of ideas, or of conquerors, or of empires. But there is a book making a different argument. The book says the thing that has actually moved human history is much smaller than any of those stories. Microbes, pathogens, the invisible half of history. Some months back, in one of our lab meetings, I spent a chunk of the hour telling my students about a book I had been reading in the evenings. Jonathan Kennedy's Pathogenesis, a history of the world in 8 plagues. Kennedy is a public health scholar at Queen Mary University of London. And his argument is that the material force we systematically underestimate when we are trying to explain large historical shifts is pathogens. I told my students that, as disease ecologists, we could discuss that book during the semester, and that I had 2 reactions to it. As a scientist, I found Kennedy's rigor persuasive. As a Catholic, I found 2 of his chapters unsettling because they describe my tradition being tested twice. I am not saying this as doctrine. I am working something out for myself and inviting you to look at it with me. Whether or not you share my faith, what Kennedy shows about pathogens is science on its own terms. What I add is my own reading. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries, when the Antonine plague and the plague of Cyprian swept the Roman Empire, the young Christian community did something unique. They stayed. They tended the sick. They buried the dead of families they were not related to. They accepted the personal risk. The record on this is not gauzy. Bishop Cyprian himself wrote it down in a treatise called De Mortalitate. Cyprian's argument was simple. The plague was a test of whether Christians could actually live what they professed. If they could, they should. Kennedy makes the material argument. Christian communities survive at higher rates because the sick were nursed. The math is credible. Even basic nursing, like fluids, warmth, food, presence, raises survival probabilities substantially. The differential is measurable. And Christian communities grew in the wake of the plagues, partly survival differential, partly observation by the pagan culture. 12 centuries later, in 1347, a Genovese fleet brought the plague to Europe, and by 1351, 30 to 50% were dead. This time, the response of the Catholic clergy was mixed. Many priests stayed and died at higher rates precisely because of that exposure, but others fled. As a scientist, the material chain is coherent. Pathogens cascade through institutions the way they cascade through bodies. Selective mortality of conscientious and dedicated clergy left a vacuum filled with less well-formed replacements. This is disease ecology applied to a social institution. And here is where I have to add my own reading as a Catholic. Real corruption existed, and the plague made it possible. I want to name it clearly. But historical failures do not settle the theological question. Christ himself spoke of it in Matthew 24:13. The one who endures to the end will be saved. In Matthew 7:21, we read, "Not everyone who says, 'Lord, Lord,' will be saved, but the one who does the will of my Father." And in Matthew 16:18, we clearly see how Christ establishes his church when he said, "On this rock I will build my church," and the rock was Peter. These passages describe the faithful response, not to depart, but to endure and reform from within. The church is the one Christ founded on Peter. I say this respectfully to my non-Catholic brothers. The plague did not justify departure. Christ's own words did not permit it. Christ wanted his church to be one, a united flock, which is clearly stated in John 10:16, and then by St. Paul in Ephesus 4:4-5. One body and one spirit, one Lord, one faith, one baptism. Thank you for watching. Share this if it was useful, leave some comments, visit santiagolab.org for more information, and please remember to stay curious as a child and stay Renaissance.